All right, you've made it to the last chapter of this course. So to wrap up everything, we're gonna go ahead and talk about how we can use staging to further refine our business process in the case where you might need something like this. So right now, when we create content and place it on the page, or even when we have a self-updating page set up with the asset publisher, or we're using any of those tools or processes that we've talked about in the last few chapters, it's just going to show up for our users at any time it's placed on the page. Now, in some cases, something like that might be fine. In fact, in the case of the self-publishing page, we might just need workflow to be sort of that in-between to make sure everything is copy edited, make sure everything is reviewed before it actually hits that page. But in other cases, we may need the ability to distinguish our work in progress environment from our production content. Okay? This is where staging comes in. Staging allows us to keep our changes distinct from our live production environment. Okay? Now it's important to note that staging is primarily dealing with the pages and the widgets and configuration on those pages rather than directly dealing with all of the assets or content themselves. Okay? Staging is a one-directional process from your work in progress environment to your production environment. And you can, of course, as we'll see, select certain kinds of content to fit within that process. But in the case where that content shouldn't fit in that process, it is not going to be primarily dealing with that. It'll primarily be focused on the pages themselves, okay? I'll show you what I mean. Now, there are two types of staging configurations that we can work with. This may not be something that you are directly responsible for if you're taking this course. Perhaps your system administrator guys are doing this. Perhaps they've already set it up for you. But for understanding how this works, we have these two types. We have the local live and remote live. Now, local live is going to allow us to essentially have our production environment and our staging environment on the same server, the same database, the same instance of Liferay. Okay. Now, this is convenient. We don't need to make publishes over the network. And I would say for more small scale sites, this might actually work out quite well. Okay. We can get those changes out the door quickly. The downside, of course, is if I need to test something to see if it should go out on live, perhaps a new widget, a new application, different things along those lines, I can't necessarily do that because it's the same instance. So what is on my production will be on my staging, okay? The same thing with different versions of tools. If I want to keep new version updates distinct until I can verify that they'll work on my platform, I'm not gonna be able to do that in the same way that I would otherwise. So there's definitely some consideration that would need to be taken for using local live, okay? Now, the alternative to this is remote live. Now, remote live assumes that you have a completely different instance, server, database, etc., distinct from your production environment, database, server, instance, etc. Okay. Now, this could potentially slow down the publications because you do actually need to go over the network when you're doing a publish, but you now have a completely separate environment where you can test new things, you can test new versions, different things along those lines, and then you can go ahead and deploy them when you are ready, okay? So typically for more large scale enterprise solutions, remote live is gonna be the recommended staging approach. All right, so keep that in mind. You have the two different types of staging here. You have local live and you have remote live, all right? And staging allows us to distinguish our work in progress environment from our actual live site, okay? So while staging's primary function is to distinguish the pages and the widgets and the configuration, content can also be staged as well. And you'll want to keep in mind that that content needs to go through that one directional process if you want to have it staged. Okay, so an example of what not to do would be to do something like stage message boards. Okay, why? Because if you have message boards on your production site and people are supposed to be interacting, if you have it turned on in staging, it's essentially saying that you cannot post and publish to live unless you log into the staging environment, and that kind of situation doesn't really make too much sense. So that's what I meant by being primarily focused on the pages, the widgets, and the configuration, but you can also include some of the content publication through staging as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like for the Livingston Hotels and Resort site.